Back on the podcast. So happy to be joined this week by the Senior Vice President of NFL Broadcasting, Howard Katz, and the Vice President of NFL Broadcasting, Mike North. They've just finished an arduous process. I've written about this, which is the NFL schedule. I've written about this, and a couple of people have said, how hard can making a schedule be? And I said, well, I don't know, because I've never done it, but I've been inside the room and I've seen what basically a well-used room, scheduling room at NFL headquarters looks like.
And smells like.
So, and smells like. That's good, Howard. But anyway, I really appreciate you guys being on. And look, I thought that what we would do and the best way to sort of frame this is, and Howard, either you or Mike would be fine to answer this. Can you just sort of give me a broad brush look at how the process begins, when it begins, and how it develops over a 4-month span?
I'll take a crack at it, and then Mike can add in. The process begins right when the regular season ends, and we know all of the opponents, right? There are a couple of games that are standings based. So once we know that, Mike begins to load into the computer all of the games. And this year is a little tricky because we weren't sure when we began the process whether we were going to play a 16-game, 17-week schedule or a 17-game, 18-week schedule. So that was a little tricky. We, right around the Super Bowl, meet with all of our broadcast partners. And CBS and Fox basically tell us the games that they most want to keep on their schedule. And NBC and ESPN give us the games that they would like to see on their schedule. And generally, those lists are pretty similar. So our challenge really is how we split the baby and how we allocate all of the top games. So we begin the process right after the Super Bowl by kind of laying in what we call our key games chart. What are the games that we sort of want to see on the Sunday night schedule, on the Monday night schedule? What are the key doubleheader games that we want to keep on CBS and Fox? And we generally create pools of games. So it's not just one game in one slot. And then we just start running simulations and running over and over and over again. And with the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. That's exactly what we do. So every day, Mike creates new seeds based on what we've seen and want to see. And then he puts those into the computer. The computer runs, spits things out. And what the computer is trying to do is solve our puzzle with the framework that we give it. And anything that we don't want to see in a schedule, we assign points to. So a 3-game road trip is something we generally don't want to see. And that there's a certain penalty value assigned to that. We obviously can't play a game at the same time something else is being played, and that becomes a 9-9-9, right? So the Chargers and the Rams can't play a home game on the same day. So the computer now tries to solve our puzzle with the lowest possible score. And as the process evolves, we keep changing penalty values to try to lead us in the direction we want the computer to take us. Mike, you can add a lot more specifics to that than I.
No, that's the basics. You got it. I mean, you walk into that room January 4th, February 4th, you've got a picture in your mind of the television packages. This game sounds like a Sunday night game. This game feels like a Monday night game. We kind of feel like our job is to show you the impact of those decisions. If we know we're going to put this game on Sunday Night Football and we lock it in and go, here's what you're looking at. It might lead to a 3-game road trip. It might lead to a different game for one of those teams not being eligible for Sunday night. So we feel like the exercise here is to just kind of feed you feedback, if you will, and let you know the impact of each of the decisions that you're thinking about making. And you've gotten really good over the years at kind of shifting from, you got to put this game in this week, I can't see it anywhere else, to, look, this game feels like it belongs in October. let's let the computer decide whether week 6 or week 7 is the right home for it.
Let's just focus on one aspect of that now, and that is 17 games versus 16. So after the season ended, after the regular season ended, and you knew who was playing who in 2021, did you start to make a 16-game schedule and a 17-game schedule per team?
Well, we decided that we would start off by building the 17-game schedule because that was something new. And if it was decided that we were going to play a 16-game schedule, we'd default back to something that with which we were really familiar because we've been doing it for so many years. But the 17-game schedule had new challenges, and we wanted to see what the pitfalls were. So it was better for us from a process standpoint to start by building the 17, knowing that if the decision was later made to cut back to 16, it was easier for us to go back to something familiar than to begin something unfamiliar midway in the process. The good news is that the league has been thinking about this and talking about this for some years. So Mike and Ani Bose and Charlotte and the whole scheduling team, Blake Jones, we've had a chance to be thinking about how we would put together a 17-game, 18-week schedule. And we did a lot of the homework. We were able to talk to the competition committee and other owner groups about just how we would suggest and recommend playing that 17th game. So by the time we got there, we were pretty comfortable with the logistics and the ins and outs, but that's how we did the process. We started with 17.
What were the concerns or the big differences about adding a game to everyone's schedule?
The biggest difference was the number of possible schedules that were now out there. We've talked before about the 256, the 16 games over 17 weeks. That solution space was already essentially infinite, hundreds and hundreds of trillions of possible schedules. No way we could look at all of them. No way we're even going to look at a 10th of 1% of them. Now with 272 games, 17 games over 18 weeks, the solution space is even bigger. So the concern, at least for me on the math and science side, was how are we still going to be able to churn through the solution space every night and react to Howard's feedback every day? You know, if we can show him 6 or 8 or 10 schedules every day and he'll look at each one and say, I don't like this and I do like that, and let's lock this in and let's lock that out. We can tell the computer, hey, here's what we learned from the boss. Take this information and keep going forward. But weren't really sure we were going to be able to get through the space as quickly as we had been and able to turn around a dozen schedules every morning and get that feedback that we need from the humans. So the space was infinite, still bigger somehow. But like Howard said, the extra games also added some positives to our process. First and foremost, you picked up a couple of really good games, right? We're trying to feed a lot of mouths, and we're trying to make sure that all the network partners have bites of our juiciest apples, if you will. Well, Green Bay, Kansas City was a new game. Dallas, New England was a new game. Seattle, Pittsburgh was a new game. Those are juicy apples. So having those to deploy for our network partners helped. And those 16 extra games, when we added them to the 256, they weren't like the other 256 where the road team determined the network. They were all NFC and AFC games because we thought that was fairest, but they didn't all come in as Fox games. They came in as free agents. So we're able to pick a few right off the top, put them in national windows, and the rest were kind of free to move around the board and land in good spots for CBS and Fox each week. It actually helped us a lot as we were trying not just to build good primetime schedules, but build good Sunday afternoon schedules as well.
Yeah, Peter, that's a good point that Mike made. One of the things we had to do was get CBS and Fox comfortable with the notion that those 16 extra games were going to be what we call free agent, because neither thought it was in their interest to have 16 extra games one year and then 16 fewer games the next. So that was one of the pieces of the puzzle, was just once we determined that we were going to play the 17-game, 18-week schedule, we then had to get CBS and Fox to agree the manner in which we were going to treat those additional 16 games. A lot of moving pieces.
Howard, what about the Aaron Rodgers variable and the Green Bay Packers? The Packers ended up with a max 5 primetime games. And it appears that, to me, what looks to me to be smart about the schedule is that, let's say Aaron Rodgers isn't on the Green Bay Packers. Well, you've basically satisfied all 4 network partners in the first 4 weeks of the season. The Packers start with a Fox doubleheader in week 1 at New Orleans. Then they go to a Monday night game in week 2 for ESPN. Then they go to a Sunday night game in week 3 at San Francisco for NBC. And then the following week, they're on a CBS doubleheader against Pittsburgh. So when I looked at that, I said, this is smart because even if Aaron Rodgers isn't on the team, let's just say, everybody still wants to see, there's a fascination with, I don't know who it's going to be, Blake Bortles, Jordan Love, who Nick Foles, I have no idea. But there's a fascination to me that people are still going to want to see him. And so you were able to land one for all of your network partners in like the first month of the season. But talk to me a little bit about how you navigated the Aaron Rodgers conundrum.
Well, first of all, the Green Bay Packers are still the Green Bay Packers with or without Aaron Rodgers. They are a great team and a great brand. And all of our network partners wanted to max out with the Packers. So from the outset, we knew the Green Bay Packers were going to have a lot of national attention. As we kind of got closer to the draft, all the rumors that were starting to circulate about Aaron and maybe he get traded, that got us a little bit nervous, and we started to think about some of the permutations of the schedule. Ultimately, when he didn't get traded, we couldn't solve for something we didn't know. We couldn't solve the unknown. So it was pretty deliberate the way we maxed out the Packers early in the season. And you're right, each of the networks has a bite at the Packers in the first month, and that was deliberate. We'll see what happens, but we still are relying on the Green Bay Packers as a major national attraction throughout the season. We couldn't solve for something that is completely unknown at this point. We certainly hope that he stays a Packer and plays for the Packers, but that's beyond our control at this point.
Did you make any what you would call significant changes to the schedule in the week to 10 days that you had after you learned about Rodgers?
Well, the problem is we didn't learn anything, Peter. I mean, we heard a lot of rumors. There was a lot of speculation.
Right.
But we couldn't build a schedule based on speculation. We were very prepared if he had gotten traded on that first night of the draft to make some significant adjustments if we knew where he was going. But when none of that materialized, we looked at that schedule's changed every day. And some of the Green Bay Packer doubleheaders moved in weeks. But we were comfortable with where they landed. And I can't say that there were any significant changes because we didn't know what we were solving for. We couldn't solve for the unknown. And we weren't going to make major changes just based on speculation.
The crown jewel of your schedule, I would think, is Tom Brady. It's one of the most dramatic games in recent NFL history. Tom Brady going back to New England in week 4 with his new team, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Coincidentally, just a monster game because obviously the Bucs won the Super Bowl last year. So can you tell me how much did the networks all want that game, Howard, and how did you decide week 4 Sunday night?
Well, you're right. Each network lobbied for that game, and they lobbied hard. Everybody wanted it. It's obviously a crown jewel in the schedule. Um, we played with that game at various stages of our schedule in different places. I mean, that game was not always on the Sunday night schedule. It moved around a little bit. Ultimately, we decided if we were going to play that game, wherever it was going to land, we thought the first 6 weeks of the season was probably the right time for it. And it wound up landing in week 4 on Sunday Night Football. It might have landed in week 4 or 5 or 6 on Fox doubleheader. I know CBS really wanted it as a cross-flex. ESPN wanted the game. It was one of those moving pieces that I think our first leader, the first time we had a schedule that we felt pretty comfortable. If Roger said, I need a schedule tomorrow, we would have played. It was right at the end of March. And between March 30th and the final schedule that we showed to the commissioner, and that came out May 8th. Yeah, I think Saturday night, about 11:05 p.m. is when we crowned the schedule, the final schedule. We had probably 12 or 13 different leaders in there, and things kept moving around, and that the position, the placement of that particular game moved quite a bit. I would say by the latter part of April, we were pretty locked on the general format for the schedule, and that game being on Sunday night and the Green Bay Kansas City game being as a Fox doubleheader. Most of the form was in place by late April. And at that point, it was really just tweaking things and trying to get teams out of 3-game road trips or moving some things around and seeing what we could improve. So there was a lot of shifting that went on after that point, but the basic structure was probably in place by late April.
Hey, Peter, that's a good point.
Why did it make sense to play it in the first 6? Sorry, let me just ask this quick. And then Mike, yep. Mike, why don't you answer this if you can? Why did it make sense to put that game in the first 6 weeks?
Yeah, look, this goes to what I was about to say was, you'll remember having met with us over the years, and we go back not that long ago to where, Val Pinchbeck and Denny Lewin were still building the schedule one game at a time by hand. This was a decision that we would have had to have made very early in the process. And why early? It's still a story week earlier in the season. It's less about whether these teams are fighting for division races, playoff implications, less likely to have an injury, less likely to have weather. The story can be about Brady's return. It would be different if he's standing on the 50-yard line watching a tribute video in November in 6 inches of snow, or the later in the season we go, the more likely somebody's injured. So getting in early, having that story told, made some sense. But again, not that long ago, we would have had to make that decision very early in the process, lock it in and go, and come hell or high water, that's what was going to have to happen. Like Howard said, we were pretty late in our process before we really locked in on putting that game on Sunday Night Football. We were willing to see it on Fox. We were willing to see it on ESPN. And we saw finished schedules, good, playable, legal finished schedules with that game in other homes. The fact that we were able to see so many good schedules with different homes for that allowed us to be a little bit more discerning about, where is the best place to deploy that game? And like we said, once we started seeing it kind of settle into NBC, settle in early in the season, knowing that was something that kind of Howard had in his mind about what he was rooting for anyway, seeing good schedules down that path allowed him to say, why don't we just lock that one in and keep going, as opposed to, hey, look, the schedules are way better. With that game as a Fox doubleheader in week 9, we're really going to have to be willing to play one of those. We found good schedules down every one of these branches of the search tree.
Howard, why did the schedule that you saw on Saturday night, May 8th, make the most sense to you? What did that fix that made you say, I think this is the one?
Well, again, referring to that key games chart, the key games chart hadn't changed a lot in the last 2 weeks, I would say, of the process. So what we were trying to do was deal with what we thought were the worst issues for teams. There were a couple of 3-game road trips that involved a cross-country trip. That we were trying to tweak out those kinds of things where we looked at a team schedule and said, yes, this is playable, but could we improve on it without breaking too many other things? And that's what Mike set out to do every night for probably the last 2 weeks, was set the computers off, trying to solve particular team issues without breaking too many other things. The other thing I'd say to you, Peter, is that Mike, and particularly with the help of Charlotte Carey and Nick Cooney, spent an enormous amount of time this year focused on the 1 o'clock windows, probably more than we ever have. Generally, when I look at a schedule, I look at probably 112 games on that schedule. I look at all the national appearances and making sure that there's what the doubleheaders look like, and that there's a anchor game at 1 o'clock every week. And generally, the rest of the 1 o'clock windows just kind of fall as they fall. And this year, with Nick and Charlotte's real strong efforts in this area, they spent a lot of time trying to make sure we had games that checked off the box in each region of the country. And as a result, we think our Sunday afternoon television is stronger than it's ever been. We hope that winds up being the case. But as we look at it right now, and as we talk CBS and Fox through their schedules over the last 2 days, we felt pretty good, and they felt pretty good, that the regionalization of the 1 o'clock games is going to work better this year than ever before. And that's a lot of the tweaking that was done towards the end of the process.
I should say that you've got a five-member team. There's you two. There's Charlotte Carey, the senior broadcast manager, Ani Bose, another vice president of broadcasting, and also Nick Cooney, a new member of your team in the broadcast
and Blake
department.
Jones, and Blake Jones, who's been with us for a couple of years, and Blake does a great job really looking at things from a team perspective, and looking at rest disparity and things like that, and also putting together the preseason schedule. So it's a strong team of 6.
If we can just, I'm going to go over, I've got 6 other little things that I want to go over, and I'm going to try to go sort of in a lightning round way. I remember in 2017 when I did a story on this, you had that year 7 teams with a 3-game road trip, and I think 5 teams were on the road Sunday, after a road Monday, in addition on that schedule. This year, by my count, you've got 3 teams with a 3-team road trip, and I don't think you have any team playing a road Monday night and then a road Sunday. Is that true? And if so, how did that happen?
We've got one. We've got one road after road Monday. But okay. Thanks for bringing up the 2017 schedule, Peter. Thank you very much for that.
You love that one.
Yeah. No, look, the truth is that's the whole dance right here. Howard's got a vision in his mind for what the primetime schedule and what the television schedule should look like. We're trying to enhance our own understanding and the math and science and deployment of these, juicy apples and 1 o'clock windows. And we're trying to do all that while minimizing team pain. And one of the things we always kind of wrestle with, is it global pain or is it individual pain? Because you referenced a schedule that had a few more teams that had one thing to be a little disappointed in us about. But if that was only the one thing that they were disappointed in us about, nobody cares whether the overall schedule has only 1 3-game road trip or no road after road Mondays. All they care about is what happened to me. And if everybody had one thing happen to them, well, you could argue that's maybe more fair than only a few teams being negatively impacted with some of these competitive issues. So every year it's a constant exercise, and we've been very fortunate. Our software partners, our hardware partners, we have so many more computers at our disposal. We've got so many smart people helping us. We've improved the process leaps and bounds. And like I mentioned before, Howard's kind of shifted his approach. When Val Pinchbeck was doing this, he did exactly what Howard said. He focused on the 117 games that mattered. The primetime games, the doubleheader games, the 1 o'clock anchor, whatever else happened. And sometimes that made for week 1 o'clock windows, or it made for multiple 3-game road trips. But now we've all kind of learned, before you lock something in, try to understand the impact of that decision. And we try to be a little bit more open-minded, a little bit more flexible, give the computers the ability to search through the infinite space and find the one that makes best television without impacting too much team pain on everybody. Would we have played a schedule with 5 3-game road trips? Yeah. As long as they were 5 reasonable 3-game road trips and the television was good. And we certainly looked at schedules that had 5 or 6 3-game road trips on them. One of the reasons we liked this particular schedule was we felt really good about the TV and there was relatively little team pain.
Mike, let me dovetail off that and ask you. You brought up a few minutes ago about rest and about the factor of, trying to make it as egalitarian as possible. That one team doesn't play 3 teams coming off a bye, and then somebody else plays no teams coming off a bye. How exactly do you do that? It seems to me that would be a real thorn in the side of trying to make an equal schedule.
You gonna take that one, Howard?
No. You can take this. Look,
I'll take that one.
The truth
the
is
answer
that
to your question.
Every day, every morning, Charlotte, who goes through these schedules, will throw away dozens because of rest disparity issues. We have a chart that comes out with every schedule that shows every team in the rest disparity. And anything that we think is over the limit, we just throw away. So this particular schedule that we're playing was number 102,844. And I would say there were probably 20,000 schedules that got thrown away just because of rest disparity.
I find that fascinating. It's really interesting. And I assume a lot of those schedules were really good other than the rest disparity.
That's right, but it's not fair. It's not fair to ask a team to play 5 games against teams coming off a bye.
Right.
Yeah, we threw a lot of perfectly good schedules, and that's just indicative of how far we've come in this process. Because a dozen years ago, we wouldn't have thought twice about it. We would have played those schedules. I mean, we're throwing away schedules that we would have played 10 years ago without blinking an eye. And that makes us feel good that we're doing a much better job, not just for our television partners, but across all 32 teams, for trying to come up with what are fair schedules. No schedule's perfect, and everybody's got some gripe, but they were minimal this year.
How many of the 102,844 schedules did at least one person from the team actually lay eyes on?
Every single one.
Every one.
Every single one. The only way this thing works, the only way this process works, isn't just wait all night long to find one schedule. It's to learn something from every schedule along the way. So every time the software said, all right, I understand the rules. I understand what Howard wants you to try to solve for. I understand what I can and can't do to the teams. I understand where I can and cannot play based on the stadium availability or based on travel. Off it goes into the infinite space. And every time it finds a finished jigsaw puzzle, we can learn a little something from that. Hey, look at that. It took a penalty for this. Is that still a penalty? Is that something that we'd be willing to play? What if this was the only schedule that we found tonight? Is this playable? If it's not, we should turn that penalty from 100 points or 200 points into 1,000,000 points and never see this schedule again. So every single schedule that finished, somebody looked at. And then, like Howard said, a good analogy here, Peter, you remember that I Love Lucy show where she and Ethel were working and the chocolates were coming on the conveyor belt and they were starting really slowly and they were no problem, one at a time. And then it started getting faster and faster. That's Charlotte Carey.
Yeah.
Charlotte has to wake up every morning and see what pieces of chocolate came down the conveyor belt And like Howard said, she's got to figure out which ones are good pieces of chocolate, which ones solve the NBC problem, which ones put Tampa, New England where Howard wants it, which ones have legal rest disparity for all of our teams or 3-game road trips that we should never play. And the faster that conveyor belt goes and the more pieces of chocolate we can throw at Charlotte, the more we can learn. And yeah, we drove Charlotte a little nuts, but we learned something from every single schedule. We put eyes on every single one. And by the end, we weren't kicking out 1,000 a night. Like Howard said, when we get down to the very, very end, we'd kind of painted ourselves into a corner, willingly painted ourselves into a corner around a key games chart that we were very comfortable with. And now it was just a question of balancing the 3-game road trips, the rest, the cross-country travel, the road after road Mondays. And by the end, that conveyor belt had slowed to a trickle, but each piece of chocolate coming out at that point was one of our best pieces of chocolate. So that conveyor belt was, we were drinking from the fire hose at the beginning. There were hundreds of schedules a day, but by the end, there were only a few, but they were all really good.
The other thing, Peter, at the end that was really appealing to us was that there are no buys until week 6 in the schedule. And with the 18-week schedule and the fact that everybody's got a week off between the end of the preseason and the start of the regular season, we didn't want buys to start too early. So in this particular schedule, no buys until week 6, and then buys run as late as week 14. And it'll be interesting to see how teams adjust. We've got 4 teams with week 14 buys, which we've never had before. So it'll be interesting to see how all that plays out.
As someone emailed to me this morning, they were in major pain because he said 4 teams have week 14 buys. Did you know that week 14 is when the fantasy football playoffs start? How are we going to handle that? And I wrote back to the guy and I said, I'm not your commissioner. I can't answer that question. Did you even know that?
Not until you just said it. I did not.
Those of us that play fantasy know full well that late season buys impact fantasy football standings. Yes, but obviously bigger fish to fry. And look, don't forget, we have had buys, right? It wasn't that long ago we had an odd number of teams in this league. So we have had buys every week of the season before. It's always a challenge wrestling with where the buy falls. And like Howard said, we've been tracking and managing the teams that catch the early buy kind of over and over again. We're probably going to have to start watching teams that catch the late buy. And I'm fascinated to hear, what Coach Belichick has to say either tomorrow or when the season's over. Did that buy come at just the right time as they were planning a deep run into January and February, or did that buy come too late and don't do that to us again? Don't forget Tampa Bay had a late buy last year. They had a week 13 buy last year. They got beat the week before, I think by Kansas City. Then they had the off week. Everybody got healthy. They came back. They didn't lose again. They ran the table the last 4 regular season and all the way through to the Super Bowl. So the buy may fall at just the right time, or hey, by that point, it was too late for us this year. Don't do that to us again. We'll learn a little something this year from everybody and hopefully adjust accordingly next year.
2 last things. Speaking of buys, there are 4 teams that play in London in October. 3 of them have buys the following week. The Miami Dolphins do not have a bye the following week. Why did that happen?
It was their choice. They had the option. We talked to all the teams that were in the mix for London, either as a home team or a road team. We let them know you're in the conversation. Depending on how the computers spit out tonight, you might be in London, you might not be. But if you are, how would you like us to handle that? Where do you want to be the week before? Where do you want to be the week after? Once everybody learned that the London games this year were all going to be afternoon games in the UK, 9:30 a.m. Eastern time games here in the States, a couple of them were eager to come back from London to something other than the bye. They knew that it was a longer season. They knew that the London game could be as early as week 5, and that meant committing to a week 6 bye. So you mentioned Miami. They were perfectly content to come back from an afternoon game in London. They might be back in Miami airport Sunday night by midnight. That's probably earlier than if they played in Seattle that day. So they're going to try to treat London as
hey,
just
Mike,
another road game.
I want to tell you, I figured it out. All right, if they leave Heathrow 2.5 hours after the completion of their game. They will land at Miami, in Miami or Fort Lauderdale, wherever they're flying out of, between 1 and 1:15 a.m. They're going to Las Vegas this year, playing a late window Sunday afternoon game, obviously. They will land back at Miami Airport at about 1:40 a.m. They will actually get home earlier from London than they will when they play in Vegas. And what you did, and I looked at this specifically, what you did is the week after Vegas and the week after London, you have them home game Sunday, 1 o'clock in both instances. So if I'm the Dolphins, I might say, good, push my bye back later in the year. So now that part of it all makes sense to me.
Yep, and they weren't the only ones. We didn't end up, I think it was Philadelphia. Philly was in the mix to go with Atlanta to London, I should say. They were in the same boat. They were more than willing to take a home game after London. Most of these teams now have been to London. We've been doing this a while, and everybody's really kind of figured it out. And you make a good point. It's just another road game, and in some cases, they're home from London before they'd get home from a road game in the States. Scanning
a lot of the news stuff as we record this the morning after the schedule. I think I don't sense that there's a lot of people out there who are upset. The one about the schedule. The one thing is Denver obviously wishes that it had a Monday night game and or a Sunday night game, and they don't. Was that a tough call for you, Howard?
That was a tough call, but it wasn't a deliberate call. I mean, it just turned out they didn't get it. It wasn't like we intentionally kept them off. It's just in our best spin of the schedule and what we thought was our best schedule, they just happened to be left off. It was not, we didn't set out to leave them off. We have great respect for the Denver Broncos, their team, their brand. And, they may well play their way onto a Sunday night game in flexible scheduling. So nothing deliberate, no deliberate, nothing deliberate on our part.
Right. Last thing, Howard, many times I know that in your job, I think you've been doing it now. Is this your 15th year doing the schedule?
15, yeah. Yes. You count better than I do.
So
yes.
I know many times that after the schedule comes out, you might get a phone call or two and you have to hold the phone out to hear. It's sort of like the officiating department on Monday morning from a coach who's not altogether happy. Did you get any of those calls this year?
I did not. We talked to all of our clubs and gave them their schedules, and basically everything was well received. There were, a gripe here and there, but I did not get any angry calls this year. So I guess we did a good job.
Howard Katz, Mike North, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it. I love to know, I'm a schedule nerd. I love to know how the sausage gets made. Thank you.
Take care, Peter. Good to be with you.
Take care, Peter.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.